Hello, Albuquerque Historical Society. Thank you for inviting me to come today. My name is Elaine Carson Montague, and I, with my husband, am the author of Victory from the Shadows, Growing Up in a New Mexico School for the Blind and Beyond. And today our topic is the beyond part, because you've asked me to talk about Gary's adult years in Albuquerque. He came to Albuquerque in 1955. I came in 1956. And we've adopted it as our town. Right. Go ahead. The railroad was an important part of Gary's life because he rode it to the School for the Blind when he was a child. So this picture is representing his dad on a horse. The train tracks bisected their land out by San Jon, New Mexico. Gary passed away in 2020. And I've got our website there in case you want to look at anything. This book has won 6 literary awards, including First Prize Biography in 2020 from the National Federation of Press Women, and also 2020, the New Mexico Press Women. It also won a New Mexico Regional Award, first place in Parents and Children, for the New Mexico Arizona Book Awards in 2020. It was a good year for us. Gary was born with what they called low vision. He had a twin sister who had no vision problems. So you can imagine that vision is on a continuum. So at one end of the continuum would be blindness or without light perception. And then it would progress through low vision and then legally blind and so forth until fully sighted. The word blind, though, is also used for people with limited vision, even though they do have some light perception. So the Albuquerque Historical Society has asked me, well, how in the world did Gary cope? How did he get around independently? How did he work with highly accomplished scientists and engineers? How did he handle huge visual demands? And how did he go from a school for the blind to a career with Sandia National Laboratories? It began in about 1944 when his mother told him at the age of 8 that he would be going to a new school. So they departed from Tucumcari by train and rode all night to come to Alamogordo, where the school for the blind was located. After that, he went home at Christmases and summers. This is an overview of the Alamogordo School for the Blind, somewhere around the time that he went there. And the daily routine was very important to all the children because it gave them something to depend upon. So they began each day with lining up and going to chapel Monday through Friday. For teaching in the classrooms, they were separated by gender, and they were use specialized materials and methods. A lot of talking books, which were recordings, and fascinated him. He didn't have electricity at home, so it was just amazing to him to have books on phonographs. He also was put into Braille, and the first 2 years he was there, he could read print, but he wasn't proficient enough to be able to succeed very well, especially in math. He couldn't see the worksheets in math. And so they required him to learn Braille. Well, that didn't go too well. He tried to read it with his eyes, and of course they didn't want him to do that, so they'd cover his hands with an apron, which he hated. And so he had a lot of trouble with Braille. Finally, after 2 years, they put him in what they call sight-saving print, and that worked for him. However, he did use a Braille form of math, And he also used mental math because it was a lot faster. Now, sometimes his fellow students called him Mr. Curious. He was always feeling around and looking at things. Even in our adult years, I watched him, and we'd go into some place that would be a new kind of table, and he would be next thing I know, he's got his hands underneath the table and he's feeling how this thing is put together because he wants to learn how to do it. For he was fascinated by a fluoroscope, which was an X-ray type of machine to measure what your shoes. And he used milking machines and so forth at home when they had a dairy. He did not like cats because they turned over the buckets of milk. Now, Charlie Chaplin and Helen Keller met, and you might wonder what they were talking about. So they might be talking about all the rules. There were lots of rules at the school, and Gary had to learn to live in a dormitory. In his section, there were 20 boys, and that was quite different from living on the farm with his twin sister and his parents and all the animals. Of course, we were at the time in New Mexico where people were only supposed to speak English. And so one of the things that happened to him was that he arrived at Alamogordo. He had to learn one new language, was Braille, and he had to learn to read and write it. He had to learn another new language, which was Spanish, and that was forbidden. But the kids spoke Spanish in the dormitories and on the playground when the adults weren't around. And so in self-defense, he learned Spanish. This turned out to be a great advantage to him because he became bilingual, and throughout his lifetime, he used his Spanish to teach when he worked at Sandia Labs and the outreach programs, and he also used it just throughout daily life in New Mexico. He, like many high school boys and girls, worked at a grocery store in Alamogordo for his junior and senior years. And he was a stock boy and a carryout guy. And then he also worked in the fields when he went home. So he worked in the fields around San Jon and Porter and Logan, New Mexico. And they were harvesting broom corn, brought in the migrants who were the pickers. And Gary was employed as a Spanish-English interpreter between the pickers and the farmers to help them provide for the migrants with the pots and pans and other things that they needed for their daily living. The cowboy life at home also was very supportive of Gary's life. And I think it's important to know that he learned a lot from his dad through construction and carpentry, caring for animals. This is actually his Uncle Clyde. The book is dedicated to Uncle Clyde, and here his sons are with the branding. But Gary also participated with that. Then he graduated from the New Mexico School for the Blind in 1955 and decided that he wanted to go to UNM. And why did he want to go to UNM? Because somebody told him it was the hardest, and he said he wasn't going to any other school. But this represents Gary, because when he got to UNM, he was very much a greenhorn. He arrived with his rawhide suitcase. He did not know there was a catalog. So he was enrolled, but he was not registered. He went to Mesa Vista, which was a dormitory in those days, and he was waiting for his room assignment and found out they didn't have a room for him. And so he went to the basement where there were mostly older men who were returning from Korea. And he was very unsure of himself at that time. He also went to orientation, and he found out that things that were scheduled in one room had been changed to another room. Textbooks that were available yesterday were no longer available today at the bookstore. And that people wrote on the board, and he stood in the back because there wasn't enough seating, and he had no idea what happened on the board. And then everybody disappeared, and he missed half of orientation. He didn't know where they went. This is a picture of Mesa Vista today. It is, I'm not sure it's, I think it's all administration now, but it was the dormitory at that time. So this greenhorn in the city found out pretty fast that there were no accommodations, no buddy system, no recordings, no organized way, no plan for how a person could have an alternative method of taking a test. One of the things that he was very proud of was that he was in the university chorus. Now, most people could use the music. Gary had to memorize everything without a tape recording. In fact, the whole first semester that he was enrolled at UNM, he owned no tape recorder. As he began to flounder, he didn't quite know what to do. His sister was living in town. Her husband was in Okinawa, and he would be coming back at the end of the year. So his sister was doing some reading to him late at night after she got out of her job. But it was soon overwhelming. He found out on the tests, for instance, he had some intractable professors who said, if you can't bubble in the sheet just like everybody else, then you don't deserve to pass and you're in the wrong place. So he talked to a friend of his, Paul, who was totally blind, and Paul said, you need to go talk to the Dean of Men. So he went over and talked to Dean Matheny, and Dean Matheny was a different breed. He was way ahead of his time. And I've called Gary a trailblazer here, but all the years, we were married over 60 years, and I don't know when we ever considered him a trailblazer. But in retrospect, I realized that he really was, and Dean Matheny perhaps was too. And so he talked to the professors and he said, no, you will give him more time for a test, or you will give him a reader who can read the test to him and mark his papers for him. And you will make these accommodations. They are not unreasonable. I learned just recently that the first handicapped ramp was put into UNM's campus in 1969. Gary graduated in 1960, so he was way ahead of the time when people started thinking about those things. Now, how did he do it? Well, Dean Matheny had a lady who worked for him named Elizabeth Elder, and she was sponsor of an independent sorority named Town Club. And so they decided to adopt him as their service project. And over the next 4.5 years, 300 volunteer readers read to him, mostly from Town Club. Sometimes there were others, there were Sigma Chi, there were a few people in the community who did some recordings. Part of the problem with that was that the recordings got to Gary usually after the class had already passed that point. And so it was just a little hard. And then this is a picture of Gary and me and when I was reading to him. We also, when we were dating here, we were at a dance, a Town Club dance, and Gary was just amazed. It was his last semester there, and he was chosen Town Club favorite. Now, that was a big award, and it was for the person who helped the club, who was not a member, but helped the club the most. And I was chosen ideal girl. Shortly thereafter, 1 week after his graduation, we married. Gary had a degree in secondary education. And we were very definite that he wasn't going to have any trouble getting a job. Why should he? He was one of the few college graduates, only the second college graduate on his dad's side of on his mom's side of the family, and the first college graduate in the family on his dad's side. So of course he was going to succeed. However, he was unemployed for 2.5 years. And these are remarks that he would hear. You did well in the interview, but I could not possibly hire a person with such little vision. This brought back memories of what happened to him in the College of Education. He had been called in for a meeting, and there were 5 administrator type people from the university who were there to question him. He was in a group of people, all of whom had physical handicaps. I believe a man in a wheelchair followed him. A lady who was extremely short preceded him. Well, she got really mad because she didn't like the way she was being treated, and she was not accepted into the College of Education and came storming out, cursing and everything. And so that was not a real good way to enter, but that's how Gary had to enter his meeting. And so they concentrated on, well, if you can't see, how in the world are you going to keep discipline? How are you going to help those who don't have, who aren't doing well, and so forth? And he talked about proximity, and he talked about touch, and he talked about offering extra hours of tutoring and all kinds of ways. And finally, a prominent person of the committee said, well, you may get into the College of Education, but you will never teach in Albuquerque public schools. Well, that was like throwing the gauntlet for Gary. And so he knew that that wasn't going to happen. He was going to teach in Albuquerque public schools. However, by the time he was ready to do that teaching in APS, the man who had spoken those words was the superintendent of schools, and no job offers were forthcoming. This picture is an overview of about 1994. That's the year that Gary retired from Sandia Labs. It was recently in the paper, and he was employed for 15 years in training and education and 17 years in safety engineering. Now I'm going to read to you something from his book. And this talks a little bit about what happened when he went for his final interview. And actually, he was hired that day. But anyway, this is from chapter 41 of Victory from the Shadows. My diploma languished in my pocket in pristine condition for another 6 months before a promising interview and a final test in the parking lot of a large company. I met potential division and section supervisors and the company's doctor. They watched while I followed one's wave of an arm and general instructions to walk over and around parking barriers, through the gated chain link fence, beyond a theater and into an office. Besides finding my way, I think they wanted to see if I could walk without tripping. And that's why you see parking barriers there on the picture. I quickly completed these tasks and became part of Sandia Corporation, or Sandia National Laboratories, and a member of the group of employees doing unclassified tasks while waiting for a security clearance. We were called the leper colony because we were restricted to where we could go and what we could see. I think it's kind of ironic that a man with visual impairment became the audio-visual guy, but that's what his job was. How did he do it? Well, for one thing, the phone was essential, and you note that there's a film reel here and lots of visual stuff. There's an extra pair of glasses. I'm not sure what this thing is. But you can see all the evidence of visual tasks. And he had to write things. He used Sharpies and things like that. And he also brought his own tools from home because he was always fixing things. This gives you an idea about how close he had to look in order to see in his toolbox. The company bought him an accommodation. Now, it was actually not in color, but I couldn't find a picture in black and white. But it was pretty much worked this way. And his was called, this is a modern one, but his was called Apollo Laser. And we think it was the first closed circuit TV system purchased in New Mexico for a visually impaired person. And he could move this table up and down and forward and backward so that he could magnify a print. And he could put a book down there or paper. Gary wanted people to understand how he coped with daily life. And so he wrote The Conundrum of Low Vision. When I was 3, doctors told Mother that my visual acuity was 2,500. I had to be 20 feet from an object to see what most people saw at 500 feet. I had quite a loss. I could not find the ball my twin sister tossed to me. When I was finishing college, an ophthalmologist told me that 2,500 is what I see with my better eye and best glasses, while the other eye sees half that well. To complicate my situation, my less good eye frequently overpowers my better eye. My vision flip-flops without notice, and then I do not see as much as 2,500. Sometimes I do not see the biggest letter on the eye chart. Since one eye sees or the other eye sees, I never have depth perception or much peripheral vision. After I retired from Sandia National Labs, I had cataract surgeries. The doctor discovered the lens sacs had not formed properly, and she could not replace either lens. Later in life, a neurosurgeon tried to find out why I was having balance problems and said, "There's nothing there to work with, sir." He said the occipital lobes also did not develop and showed me how dark they looked on a brain scan. People sometimes ask me how I do everyday tasks. My own father told me he never understood what I saw until his 80s, when he developed cataracts and suffered vision loss with surgery restored. After 8 decades living with low vision, I have strategies to navigate without getting hurt. Some are automatic, like feeling my way around with my hands or feet to determine distance or height of objects around me. I listen for clues too, like echoes, because that does not always work. Stress rises and I am extra cautious. Sound helps me determine how far away moving cars or animals are and how quickly to get out of the way. With partial sight, it is tough to judge how far I must open a car door, or how low to bend a head for clearance, or how high and far I must step. Therefore, I rely upon trial and error, entering and exiting cars and trucks, same as I did with farm equipment when growing up. I might have gotten a few more pinches and hurts than a fully sighted kid would get, but I didn't notice. Before I went to the New Mexico School for the Blind at age 8, I could not see the numbers in the books, and my poor arithmetic skills in school frustrated Dad. He unknowingly taught me a lot about geometry. We used ladders in construction, and he taught me how to use them safely. I remember his direction, Dad's law of physics. If you're going to use a ladder, you got to learn how to set it up so you don't fall off and the ladder doesn't fall down. Look here, boy. Set it so the distance from a wall to the base of the ladder gives you a good, safe angle. And watch out for how slick a surface is, because they ain't all the same. And watch out for the molding. Steps of ladders are shallow, and house stairs more nearly match a person's foot from heel to toe. My ladder climbing days are over, but I remember how I felt more secure on ladders with metal bottoms than on the older wooden ones we used at home, because the metal tips moved and adjusted themselves on concrete. Through feel and experience and her Dad's watchful eye, I never fell off, although I thought I would when Elaine decided we should climb a long ladder to a cliff dwelling in Mesa Verde National Park, Colorado. That wooden ladder was not like my dad's, and I thought it was crazy that tourists were allowed on it. On stairs, I reach for handrails and test depth and height. Angles of railings indicate steepness. I hear others on a stairway, and my own footfalls offer clues whether I face a lot of steps or a few. It's easier to judge on wooden ones. People with vision changes must adjust ordinary activities. I hated giving up climbing onto the roof to service our swamp cooler several years ago. Until past middle age, I could see well enough to do that and could step off curbs in town without much difficulty if I tested them with a walking cane. I now travel with a companion. When I used to mow the lawn, I tightened bolts and changed filters, added gas and changed oil, aligned the grass catcher, and made sure the clamps were caught, and then cut in a pattern that didn't miss spots. Putting on shoes with Velcro is faster than tying laces. While shaving, I use an electric razor first, then feel where the whiskers are and finish carefully with a safety razor. Modern t-shirts modern t-shirt manufacturers use ink markings instead of tags. So I lay a shirt down to find the front where the collar dips. On undershorts, the rib at center back is easy to feel and there is a fly in front. Being in public presents other problems. The contrast between outside light and the light inside a building results in total blindness that does not clear up for quite a while. When I enter a church, I cannot see pews or much of anything else as I find my way. Dim lighting is also a problem, like in bathrooms and restaurants. Some public bathrooms have drains that make the floors uneven, and I may not know where the drains are. When my feet have my full attention, my head may ram into a column on a porch or the corner of an open cabinet door. I walked alone with an IV pole at the hospital, but I could not see my feet or the casters. The pedestal's wide base reminded me of a four-pronged walking cane that I didn't like because it was a tripping hazard. In the old days, Dad and I did not use the terms such as geometry, friction, or physics when we solved problems, nor did we realize all the mental math I was acquired at home. Helping Dad, who was called Ted Montague, was real life learning, which gave me results that I could see or feel or use. When I got to NMSD and I had trouble mastering Braille with my clumsy fingers, it did not make sense to me not to use my eyes. Perhaps I also inherited a little of Dad's tubness, a stubbornness born into the Montague men. My parents taught me well without special guidance and taught me to figure out how to do whatever I had to do. New Mexico School for the Blind taught me confidence and how to apply skills of independence. No one there said I could not learn, called me handicapped or disabled, or let me off easy. Sometimes I admit I feel exhausted with all the extra effort required, such as a wind-up toy whose key is missing, with no oomph, no go. But then I remind myself to dress well and move on by remembering, and this is an acronym, DRESS. Determination is my base. Resilience is my key. Effort is required. Survival is ensured, and success will come. In bare bones, we talk about in the office and how I got around to other buildings on other parts of Sandia. And then we talk a little bit about offsite classes. Does he need a reader? Transportation was always a problem. And he did, one of the things he thoroughly enjoyed was his trip to Tonopah and doing a video script. Now, he did have a travel companion. It was another employee who was going to a different part of the facility. And so at part of the time he was in the company of someone there at Tonopah, and part of the time was somebody who came from Albuquerque. And then one of the things that comes up is the question, am I a token? And he had a couple of instances that he needed to deal with Sandia. One was very pleasant, and it had to do with a scientist. I don't remember the name of the man, but he was somebody eminent, and he had become blind after he became eminent. And so Sandia brought him in, and they asked Gary if we would meet the man at the airport and bring him to a special dinner, and Gary would be there to visit with him. So we did. That was very nice. But another time, Sandia decided to ask Gary to be the handicapped employee of the year. Gary refused. And we had a long discussion about that. And I said, that's not the way to get along, because they expect you to accept. And it's what my mother used to call cutting off your nose to spite your face. But he said, I'm sorry, but I can't do it because they're making me a token. And that is not appropriate. And I cannot accept their offer. Gary loved building things. Now, here he was refinishing a table and matching chairs, but he built all kinds of projects for me to use in my classrooms and also in the school library, wherever I was assigned. He came into the schools, I don't know, they're always needing repair. He repaired holes and he repaired toilets, and he did all kinds of work in whatever schools I was assigned to. We did have some entertainment. We traveled and enjoyed some activities. You might wonder how he got along. He had learned at the school to walk independently. And no one at the School for the Blind, when he went there, or even until he graduated in 1955, no one used a white cane. No one used an animal to help him get around. When we went back in 2003 for the 100th anniversary celebration, we noticed that students and teachers were using assistive devices like white canes and dogs at that time. Gary never used either of those, but I became the dog and he used me. And what he learned to do when he was young was people lined up a lot, and they either put their hand on the shoulder of the person ahead of them or took an elbow. And usually Gary's sight, even though he was low vision, he had more sight than many of the other students. So usually he was the leader. So to review, the problems in public spaces that he found were lighting and walking surfaces, and that you must listen, listen, listen. What he learned from his about independence was his parents said, do whatever you have to. At school, he developed confidence. And then some of the tools that he used at Sandia, and these were tools that he furnished himself. Monoculars, that is like a binocular, only it's only got one cylinder, and that's because he only used one eye. And magnifiers, usually lighted ones, broad tip markers, telephone, tape recorder. He would ask others, and he would use talking watches. One of the tasks that he had to do was inventory of equipment, and numbers, inventory numbers, control numbers were scratched or engraved onto the equipment. But then he had to find out where those numbers were, because sometimes they were underneath, sometimes they were on top. There was not consistency, and they also were difficult for him to read. So in those cases, he had to use these magnifiers, bright lights, and other people. Today, today you might find all these items at the bottom of the screen available. They were not available for him during his work career, but there's a lot of voice control. Optical readers are like when you put on a pair of glasses and there's a little, they're on the temples, and they can actually look at a label in a grocery store and read you the label. They can tell you the nutrition label or whatever. They can center into, if you have some residual sight, you might be able to see it better, and so forth. They can also identify clothing and colors so that you can tell which is your purple pants versus your blue pants. And there are electronic magnifiers that you can, they're little portable things that you can just set right on your paper, and you can look and you can read with those. Voice synthesizers read text aloud. I remember the first voice synthesizer that I saw was in about 1971-ish, and it was at Zimmerman Library at UNM, and I was so excited, I couldn't believe it. It was the Kurzweil, and I went home and told him there was this fantastic machine. And since then, actually, I've known somebody who actually had one in his house. We never did, but just an amazing accomplishment. Today, when the kids go home from the school, if they go to the school at Alamogordo, they are usually there because they cannot get along in their home school with the one-on-one assistance. So, but they go home and stay with their families on the weekends and in the summers. So if they're mainstreamed in APS or some other school system, why they have one-on-one human assistance that are provided. There's transportation that's provided to take you home on the weekends. Every weekend, they either fly or use the shuttle, and all of that's provided, unlike what Gary experienced. There are training centers for adults. Sometimes they go to another state, like some of our New Mexico people go to Arizona, but sometimes they're in New Mexico. Gary, when he first got his own personal talking watch that he bought, that was one of the best things that ever happened to him. And it was like a huge step forward. Today, there are real-time read-alouds with the use of computers, and the talking books have compressed speech. The latest talking book that Gary had while he was in assisted living before he died had little cartridges that could hold 8 to 10 novels without changing the cartridge. Amazing. And then there are guidance systems with voice in them. So I understand that at UNM, they did have some dual ramps where a person with a radio could tune in to a certain station and they could be guided. These work similar to the real estate ads where you drive up to a house and you can tune to a certain thing. Or I ran into it when I was taking my first COVID test. And I was out at the fairgrounds, and at a certain point, you tuned to a certain radio station, and then you got all your instructions. So I've started to summarize Gary's adult life in Albuquerque, mentioning his career and summer travel, periods of isolation, and recovery from a home flood. So in 1962, in December, he was hired by Sandia Labs. He went to work as an education tech in the education and training division. He did get the Apollo laser closed circuit TV for reading. At that time in the United States and around the world, there were a few visually impaired folks employed in snack bars and in sheltered workshops. So I guess that does make him a trailblazer, but it also makes Sandia a trailblazer. In 1977, he transferred, it was a voluntary transfer, to safety engineering, where he continued as an education tech. And meanwhile, he designed and built projects for my schools. One of the projects that he made was a kind of it wasn't circular exactly, and it wasn't an oval exactly, but it was pegboard that he shaped to be almost an egg shape, and it was on a it rotated, and it held paperback books, and it was presented to the librarian at Los Padillas Elementary. In 1990, the ADA was passed. The Americans with Disabilities Act made little impact for visually impaired. Now notice that Gary had already been employed almost 30 years at Sandia. In 1994, he retired. He held a lot of isolation for the next 8 years because I continued to teach. And he still built home projects alone. But transportation became an even bigger problem because I was not available. And then in 2002, in May, I retired, and our house had flooded, and we were lodged in a residence inn for 7.5 months. And my last year of teaching was during that time. And so he was alone in a motel room. And that's why he had a lot of isolation there. That's also the time period when we were going to the gym, and we began Victory from the Shadows in 2010. Gary's health began to fail. ADA began to address visual impairment for students. And so you found a lot more mainstreaming with assistance. And it was not, back in about 1977 was when there was more funding for special education, and they were moving away from isolation in specialized schools and moving to mainstreaming in regular homeschools. However, things hadn't gotten that much better for employment, and few visually impaired people were employed. You always hear the stories about the lawyers and the other people, but they were very much the exception. Gary developed hearing and mobility issues also. So I asked myself, what is it that makes a man be able to achieve against all kinds of obstacles? And I think the answer is courage. And so I'm going to read a little poem that I wrote for Gary. Courage, determined to anticipate love and celebrate life. Resolution that pleads to be set free, to weave patterns of ability and resolve, despite threads dangling without purpose. Courage in community with scars, lost elasticity and hue, frayed and broken with underlying conditions. Courage, dominant and persistent, threads of will united with purpose, tensile strong and evergreen. Courage, a badge of fortitude and hope, faith in tomorrow's sunshine, the steel to hold my frail body upright and kiss my soul. I want to thank you for this opportunity to talk to the Albuquerque Historical Society and tell you how to get the book if you're interested. Both Gary and I are the authors, and Jim Publications is our company. Again, it was chosen Best Biography at 2020 National Federation of Press Women and 5 other literary awards. And I want you to notice up here, we have a scholarship established at UNM. It's called the Elaine and Gary Montague Endowed Scholarship in Special Education. It is available at this time if you happen to have a student who is about a junior, ready for student teaching at UNM, and is interested in a dual certification in in regular ed and special ed. Be sure to tell them that they can apply for this scholarship now. Someone has written that this book is gripping in emotional intensity, rich in history, overflowing with powerful lessons, a love story, and it's full of resources at the back, current as of about 2019 to 20, about how people can get help for macular and so forth. We do have a YouTube. It was produced by Diane Schaller of Historical Albuquerque Incorporated. We have a Facebook page, and the book is available free from the National Library Service out of the Library of Congress for print disabled. It's also available on ebooks for Nook and for, what's the other one? Anyway, it's available. Whatever you want, it's available. And a paperback. You can contact me here at my author email or on my website. And if you want $5 off for your book, be sure to ask for it, because otherwise you're not going to get it. So thank you very much. This is just a picture of Gary. Actually, he had pneumonia the day that they reported that. And so now we're going to stop sharing in just a moment. And when we do, we're going to allow you to ask questions. And I think maybe some of you might have put some questions in the chat. If not, you can. I see we have at least 6 things in the chat right now. And so you can also ask your questions if you have not already done so. Janet Sayers, your thoughts on sunvan services to low vision residents of Albuquerque? Well, that's an interesting one. We didn't use it very often. I think some people are probably very successful at using it. Gary was in a wheelchair, and we did find it helpful, but he was required to have a companion travel with him. So all I know is, just based on our personal experience, I don't know if every blind person who rides sunvan is required to have somebody else with him. I think that we need to, though, to take advantage of everything that's available, and also to press for better services if we find something is lacking. So if you don't bring it to their attention, then you're not going to have it improve. Okay, Janet, you're asking another question, and that is, do you find that there is still confusion between blindness and low vision? Well, there's always confusion. It seems like. I'm not sure how to answer that question because the terminology is not clearly defined. So even in joking, people will say, oh, I'm so blind. They don't have any concept, perhaps, what blindness is and what low vision is. They think because they have a little bit of a problem that they are now blind. And so probably, I guess I'd have to say, yes, there is still confusion. But even I, having lived with Gary for over 60 years, and I knew him for over 62 years, I could not always tell what he could see. So I don't know that there's a remedy for that confusion. Now, Janet's asking, are you involved? Janet has been so wonderful to us. She helped us write an application for a grant, which we got from the Historical Society of New Mexico. And so she has seen the book from the very beginning. And she says, are you involved with providing information regarding low vision students to APS? No one has asked me to do that. That would be an interesting thing. I think I would like to do that. So we're waiting to see if there are any other questions. We do not see anything else in chat at this time. Oh, here you go. Janet was saying, that was very brave to say, I don't want to be a token to his Sandia Lab supervisors. Yes. One of the things that was very important to Gary, was speaking up. And he also knew when to hold his tongue. So it's that old thing about choosing your battles. Oh, thank you, Catherine, for your remark. Yes, I think it is a courageous story. Okay, it looks like the questions have stopped, and so we are going to say goodbye for now. And I thank you very, very much again for having me here at the Albuquerque Historical Society's meeting. And remember, the book is called Victory from the Shadows, written by Gary, Ted, and Elaine Carson Montague, available from the author or online or from a local bookstore. Treasure House and Organic, page 1. Thank you very much.